Are there any updates regarding the fate of the Garibaldi ship? The former cruiser, the Italian mobile carrier, could reach Indonesia before October 5, 2026, a date that would coincide with the 81st anniversary of the Indonesian National Armed Forces. This date was indicated by the Chief of Staff of the Indonesian Fleet, Admiral Muhammad Ali. This information was also reported by cable news network Indonesia. Currently, negotiations are underway between Indonesia, Fincantieri, and the Italian Navy, and no final contract has been announced yet. No official price has been announced. However, a possible arrival within a relatively short time could affect the extent of the work carried out in our country, in Italy, before the transfer. Another important piece of information which we didn't have before is that the Indonesian authorities have clarified that the acquisition will be classified as a grant from the Italian government. I know this is already making some of you angry, but don't worry, we'll come back to it at the end of the video. Brigadier General Rico, not Johnny, but him. The head of public relations for the Indonesian Ministry of Defense clarified that the Indonesian budget will be allocated for the necessary upgrades and modifications to adapt the Italian ship to local operational needs. The grant formula does not mean there are no costs for Jakarta. Attention, the government will have to finance the modernization and transformation that Nave Garibaldi will undergo, such as the overhaul of the engines to extend the operational life of the vessel. No detailed amounts have been disclosed, as I mentioned before, for these interventions. At the same time, the Indonesian company Republic Corporation has already expressed interest in carrying out any modification work directly in their own country. Let me take a step back, and looking at the recent past, you will remember that in September 2025, Indonesia had approved a financing plan that combines the acquisition of the ship with the purchase of new helicopters. The relevant authorities in Indonesia had authorized up to $450 million for the aircraft carrier, while additional resources are planned for the embarked aircraft. If the subsidy from Italy is confirmed, then the capital would not be destined so much for the ship itself, but for the work to be carried out during Indo-Defense 2025. A conceptual model had been presented that envisioned the use of the ship with helicopters and drones. On that occasion, models of the Turkish Bayraktar TB3 were displayed, and agreements had been signed specifically with Baykar and Republic Corporation for the local production of 60 navalized TB3 drones and 9 Akinci drones. Today's sources reveal an ambitious program for Indonesia, which could have 4 LHDs in its fleet in the future. And according to Ares Defesa, the Indonesian Ministry of Defense has started selecting and training the personnel who will operate them. About the Garibaldi, the arrival of the Garibaldi ship fits into a context of collaboration between Italy and Indonesia in the field of defense. We recently told you about the 2 offshore multi-purpose patrol vessels sold to Jakarta by Italy and the possible agreement for the M347SC. Furthermore, 6F, which are expected to arrive in the future, although it must be said, there is still no signed agreement. That said, I'll give you a couple more facts and share my personal opinion. Before I do that though, I remind you that this program is on air thanks to you, with small gestures you can make right now. Leave a like and your thoughts on today's topic and share this video using the share button. These small gestures help us a lot with the evil social media algorithm. For us who talk about delicate topics, rarely discussed in Italy, but no less important because of that. If you want to help us bring you more and more content consistently, you can consider subscribing. With just the price of a coffee a month, you help and support us in this project. Thank you very much. We gave a recap of the previous episodes in this non-sale sale. Actually, the veterans of the channel already know a bit about what I think, but I've noticed that many commenters often come back to this issue. So it's worth going back over previous steps, with some thoughts that also come from recent news. As much as we all would have liked to be able to visit her in the future as a museum ship, as you know, we're talking about a ship built in the 1980s in Monfalcone, the flagship of the Italian Navy, until 2011. After the entry into service of the ship Trieste, the Garibaldi was placed in reserve. We've often talked about this ship, so I won't take up your time, but I'll just remind you that the crew exceeds 500 members by far. Actually, many more, not even counting the men and women involved in other activities, such as air operations. The comments I usually read the most are about a major modernization that would most likely actually reduce the crew on board, or a possible transformation into a drone carrier ship, as Indonesia is probably choosing to do. And it's a choice you've often mentioned to me, along with the idea of a possible platform for launching mini satellites, in the context of the Simona program, a perfect acronym for the Italian system of launching into orbit from a ship, and it's on record that we Italians are good with acronyms, but there's a catch. Just in the past few weeks, we've talked to you about the choice made by Portugal, which will soon operate with a new drone carrier ship. I want to emphasize that we're talking about different ships and capabilities, but it's for comparison's sake. For the reasoning I'm giving you, let me tell you this. The ship will have a displacement of about 7,000 tons at full load, but it will carry something like 50 crew members compared to the numbers you're seeing on screen. Now, having a drone carrier ship definitely has advantages in detection operations against submarine units. A role, among other things, that interested Garibaldi from both state and non-state actors. We're talking at a time when there's a lot of discussion about the vulnerabilities of underwater infrastructure. On this topic, by the way, I want to point out an article by Massimo Anati in issue 0126 of RID, where the development of anti-submarine warfare is discussed. Also in relation to the use of sonobuoys deployable by manned and unmanned aircraft, which allows for the detection of potential threats and coordination with other allied platforms. The transformation of the Garibaldi ship to make it a drone carrier for patrolling with these drones, which have much lower costs in terms of money and onboard space compared to a manned aircraft. It's one of the reasons why many people would have liked to see our country convert the Garibaldi. In conclusion, as much as we may care about the Garibaldi ship, which has been a symbol and an icon for Italy, it is very likely that Indonesia itself will use the ship to gain experience. The Italian decision to move it to Jakarta is understandable in my opinion, since it maintains industrial ties between the two countries. As I showed you earlier, converting the Garibaldi into a drone carrier would have costs that I don't know if they would justify. A similar choice, especially considering the personnel that would need to be assigned. With the chronic problems we know about, unfortunately, the Italian Navy suffers. And especially considering that we already have the Trieste and the Cavour in service, which could take on some of these roles. But above all, our Santi, which might be more suitable for a similar modernization. Let me show you this photo of the San Giusto from the Italian military ship's website, which during this period, despite its issues, is taking part in operations that will also involve international allies. That said, in the last part of the video, I repeat, these are my personal opinions and I am open to discussion. Sources in the first comment and let me know your thoughts. See you soon here on Gens Italia with more news.